Good evening on this beautiful Thursday night. Live from District 14 and City Hall and all that good stuff. Just letting some people get signed in. For those of you signing in, welcome and good evening to our District 14 Town Hall meeting. Another virtual one. We've had a couple and a couple in person. And I am Alderwoman Marina Dimitrijevic. Welcome to our District 14 Town Hall meeting regarding the 2022 budget and the ARPA funding, the rescue and pandemic relief money from the federal government. Okay, well, we're going to get started because it's already a couple after 6. And one last time, good evening to everybody. I am Alderwoman Marina Dimitrijevic of District 14. Welcome to our town hall meeting tonight. As always, by the nature of you being here means you figured out how to use GoToWebinar, one of the millions of platforms we've all used during the pandemic to allow us to still meet in a safe way. Just in case you need a little reminder or refresher, you will be on mute most of the time, and there'll be an opportunity at the end of the presentations, which are pretty brief, to ask questions in the question box. Take a look at the slide in front of us. It shows you where the question box is. So, like I said, I wanted to welcome you all and introduce our speakers tonight. We will first hear from Mr. Dennis Yaccarino, who is our Budget and Management Director. He will present a bit of a picture for our 2022 budget that we just received from the mayor, including a timeline and process. And right after that will be our own city clerk, Jim Ocharski, and we will hear from him on our relief and pandemic federal funding. Then I'll speak a bit, as you can see on the agenda, to show you a bit of where the Common Council is heading in some consensus areas of recommendations of how to allocate those funds. And of course, at the end, once you've received that information, will be a great time for you to share your feedback or ask us any questions in the chat box, in the questions box. With that, we'll get started. Dennis Yaccarino, the Director of Budget and Management for the Milwaukee City Government. Go right ahead, Dennis.
Yeah, thank you. Good evening, everyone. You can go to the next slide. What I wanted to provide you is a little bit of a brief on what the budget schedule is, a little bit of what are the city challenges. I did include one slide on ARPA that I'll go through quickly, but it's just a little bit on the categories that we could use it for. The reason I included it is a great opportunity for the city. And then I'll go into a few budget numbers. But the budget begins way early in the year, in February and April. Just prior to that time frame, we send out a request forms for the budget to the departments and the capital improvement budget as well. They work on them from February to April. We get the budget document back on the second Tuesday in May, and why that's second Tuesday in May, that's by state statute. So that's why it's a little more right to the when we need it. Capital is about a month before that. From June to September, we review the budget requests with the mayor's office. That's when we sit down and try to propose, or we work on proposing a proposed budget by the mayor. The city works with on an executive basis where the mayor proposes the budget and the council reviews it. In August, the mayor has a public hearing on the budget to get citizen input into also assistance on help to prepare the proposed budget. And at the end of September, by state statute, he is required to propose a budget, and he does that normally in the council chambers with a speech that comes along with it. During October and early November, the Finance and Personnel Committee reviews the budget. At those meetings, they bring in department heads and ask questions and thoroughly go through the budget. As part of that process, early in October, there's a joint meeting on the budget with the mayor and the council and other elected officials. And the whole purpose of the meeting is to receive public input on the proposed budget. That was held this year on October 4th. In early November, the council then takes all of the amendments. They run them through the Finance and Personnel Committee first, then the whole council takes them up and they make changes to the mayor's proposed budget, and then they adopt that amended budget. The mayor then gets a chance to take a look at it again, and he can veto parts of it, and or he can just sign it. If he signs it, then the budget is done. If he does veto part of it, the vetoes do go back to the Common Council, and they get a choice on whether to uphold the veto or to override the veto. And depending on what happens, would bring the next piece. If they were to sustain a veto, then they have to put in some sort of other action. If they override all the mayor's vetoes, then it goes to mayor for signature. The challenges that we're facing are limited revenue sources. Property tax levy, it has limits. The state has built in certain restrictions on how much we can increase the levy on a given year. The other piece is that is about the only tax we have. The city is not allowed to have a local sales tax. If the decision was to grant us the ability to have one, likely it would come out through a referendum, but that needs to have state approval before we can even get that far. There's fee limitations that are written throughout the state statutes as well, and flat shared revenue, which I'll show you in a chart a little further on. Expenditure growth is faster than the rate of revenues that we get in, which creates a budget gap on an annual basis that we do have to deal with. Probably the biggest challenge that we're going to face, though, in the coming years is a pension cost increase. The city does make contributions for its employees in our retirement system. That's based on what an actuary tells us to put into the budget. Currently, that payment is $71 million. There has been some changes in how that number is calculated, mainly through a change in the assumed interest rate of return that the retirement system gets. That will increase our payment from the 71 to 149 million. Obviously a significant amount of money, but we do need to come up with a solution to that. There's also limited reserves. Next. This is a little bit about the shared revenue. As you can see, shared revenue has gone down slightly and remains flat. To put it in perspective, that's about 1/3 of our revenues. So 1/3 of all the city revenues that we take in does not increase on an annual basis. And that's a lot of the area where the structural budget issue comes in. Sorry about that. Next slide. And I just wanted to show you a little bit of the pension numbers. The pension numbers is not just a one-time shot where the number spikes up and then goes back down. It's a continual number that goes on, and we do need to find a way to address that. Next slide. Here's a little slide about ARPA, and I'll go through this quickly because I know Jim is going to talk somewhat about it as well. There's two payments the city is going to receive of 197.1. We've already received the first payment, and that's a lot of what the discussion is centering around at this point in time. And then I included a list of some of the things that can be included, and you can take a look at that later on if you'd like. But it's basically to deal with the COVID virus and also the impact of the COVID virus, both on businesses and residents as well, and disparities that were quite obvious during the pandemic. Next slide. The 2022 proposed budget totals 1.7 billion, and then I broke it down into some smaller levels of the budget. The one that you might be most interested in is the general city purpose one. That's where most of the departments show up, like the police, the fire, and so on. That's 634.1 million. The proposed levy was 305.2 million, and that's 2% higher than it was last year, and that results in a tax rate of $10.22, which is up from $10.29. Overall, the department budgets did go down, and that is again due in part to the lack of shared revenue growth. But also some of this is artificial because we did use some of the ARPA funds to address budget issues. The ARPA funds allowed us to maintain city services through the use of those funds. So we did that, and now part of our budget looks artificially low. Next slide. What I wanted to also show you is what the impact of the typical household. Now this is citywide, so some of those numbers may vary in the red at the bottom. You may want to plug in what your values were last year versus this year. But on average, the tax levy will cost the average residential household $33.43. We did not change the municipal service bill, so the snow and ice, the street lighting, the solid waste, the sewer fees did not change. So overall, the impact is 1.9% to the average household. Next slide. Here's where we get all of the money for the tax levy supported side of the budget. The big pieces that you can see are the three on the left, which make up more than half of the budget, and the intergovernmental revenues, like I said before, in this case, the chart I'm showing you makes up 22.7. That continues to fall as a percentage because it doesn't increase. And that causes the other ones to have to either change upward or we have to look for service reductions. Some of the other on here is you'll see borrowing and debt service. They kind of go together. Eventually, the borrowing that you see there will translate into property taxes as it becomes borrowed money, and we have to repay the debt at a point in the future. But those are the limited revenue sources we have, and I wanted to show you the few that we do have. Next slide. This is the one I seem to get the most interest in. This is just the departmental budget, so I want to be clear on what it's showing. Because there's other ways to look at it. For example, in this case, the police budget shows up as 43% of the budget. When you compare it to all tax levy supported departments, if you look at it as an overall of the total budget, it's closer to 15 to 17%, somewhere in there. So I just wanted to point out that it's how you want to take a look at it. Varies, and then if you do look at it as a total budget and then compare it to other cities, in a lot of cases those other cities will do different services than our city does, and they might have a few extra that make the number go lower, or in some cases they do have less police. But I just wanted to point that out to you, that of the departmental budgets in the city, 43% of it is the police, and you can see public works and fire, and with those they make up 78.1%. So a big chunk of the budget goes to those services. Next. Also wanted to show you quickly the reserves, since I mentioned the reserves in one of the earlier charts. This is one to help us structurally speaking in the future. By lowering the amount of reserves, but these are at more sustainable levels by lowering this. They will also help things like the bonds or the borrowing that the city does is based on what our reserve looks like. in part because agencies outside of the city look at our bonds and then they rate them. And right now the city's bond rating has been decreasing. So we are making a concerted effort to rely less on reserves. So this is a chart that shows you an example of that. They're down 14 million in this budget. Next slide. And then I just wanted to leave some information that you can go back to later. That is my direct line. It will go to my cell phone if I'm not in the office, so I will get all of your calls, and that's my direct email as well. If you want to look up budget information, it's on that bottom piece of the website, and you can look at the proposed budget. A lot more detail on the proposed budget is at that website, or definitely you can talk to me, and I can refer you to one of the analysts that work in the office and give you much more detail. Thank you. Appreciate the time.
Thank you so much, Dennis. And for anyone joining us a little late, that was Dennis Yaccarino from our budget management office at the city, and gave us great information. This meeting, this virtual town hall, is being recorded, so we'll send it out afterwards. And if you missed it or love it and want to share it with a friend, of course you can. Anyone else joining us? Good evening. I'm Alderwoman Marina Dimitrijevic from District 14. We have just 2 more speakers. So now our city clerk. We're trying to do 2 things at once here, which is the American Rescue Plan Act, as well as our budget, because they're interestingly lining up around the same time here. And they do complement one another. And so our city clerk here, Jim Wojcicki, who actually resides in our district, so he's a neighbor, will present on the process. I think it's really important to have context as to where this federal relief money came from, how it can be used, what the timeline is. And then following that, I'll talk a little bit about where I think the Common Council is headed in terms of ARPA. And then we will certainly open it up for questions in the question box. You can begin typing them when I conclude so that we can read them and get you some answers. And with that, I'll go over to our speaker. Thank you.
Good evening, and thank you, Alderwoman, and thanks, Dennis. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for being here. I am indeed a proud resident of Bayview, have been for, geez, well over a decade now. And it's a great pleasure to be with you tonight. The Alderwoman asked me to appear here because I'm responsible for managing the among my responsibilities is managing the legislative operations of the Milwaukee Common Council. And in so doing, one of the big things they're doing right now, in addition to the budget that Dennis just talked about, it is managing the allocations from the American Rescue Plan Act. And as this slide says, and as Dennis indicated, we're expected to receive a total of about $394 million over the entirety of the ARPA allocation. The first tranche, and you'll hear us use that word a lot, and I suspect you're going to hear it more as this starts to hit the news. The first tranche or allocation is about $197 million, and that's what's being discussed. The money, as Dennis said, can only be used for certain purposes. And those purposes are, in some sense, very general. As Dennis said, they're about relief, they're about assisting people, they're about COVID response, they're about helping the city deal with the challenges it has experienced due to the COVID pandemic. But they're also very detailed, and they're set up in guidelines that are promulgated and seemingly amended every day by the U.S. Department of Treasury. A couple of key deadlines. All of the money has to be appropriated. That is to say that the Common Council and the mayor have to say this money will be spent this way by the end of 2024, and it has to be spent by the end of 2026. Next slide, please. I observed that most of the money is still unspent. People have asked, where are you in the process? Well, the answer is very, very early. We have had only a few allocations made. They were all considered to be high priorities by the Common Council and the mayor, including his Earn and Learn program, which provided a significant number of summer jobs. We had to fill a gap in emergency medical services. There were efforts made to deal with eviction prevention and abatement, because obviously we had a lot of that going on with people losing their jobs and coming into unstable housing situations, and reckless driving abatement. That money having been spent, there still remains $376.75 million unallocated. If we can go to the next slide, please. So the Common Council evolved a process. This, unlike the budget, the Common Council chose to put together its own plan for the expenditure of this money. And to do so with this first tranche, this first allocation, and this governs only the first 197 million we talked about, was to first, all recommendations, proposed allocations, were due to the staff of the Legislative Reference Bureau by October 1st of this month. These are proposals. They're going to be placed into a uniform format, and they're going to be put into a book that'll be released to the public on October the 12th. The Finance and Personnel Committee will then take up these allocations on October 15th. That's a special meeting dedicated only to this purpose. Those that become the approved, those that meet the committee's recommendation, that are recommended, will be put into one book. Council members will then have an opportunity, if theirs were not in the approved book, to submit them into a separate book, much like we do with our budget. So there'll be an approved book, and there'll be, for want of a better phrase, an unapproved book, both of which will then go to the Common Council, which will be sent to the Common Council November the 2nd. The reason for that date and why it's so very important, as Dennis said, there has to be, some of that money is being allocated or recommended to be allocated by the mayor, and that's what this slide talks about. The mayor, in his 2022 proposed budget, recommended that some of that money be used to fill gaps in the budget. A proportion of the ARPA funds was always intended to, to borrow the phrase, make the city whole for revenue lost during the pandemic and to support necessary services. The mayor's budget calls for the use of about $44 million, as was said, targeted at direct or indirect responses to the pandemic. And his proposals have been introduced, so they will be part of what the Common Council takes up on the 15th. So you'll have the mayor's proposals offered by a council member, as well as those already put in by council members due on October the 1st. Next slide, please. Yeah. Once the council meeting is done on November the 2nd, the mayor will have 7 working days to sign, veto, or return the allocations. If he doesn't sign them, they take effect without his signatures. If he vetoes the allocations, the mayor would need 10 votes to override him. The council would need 10 votes to override him. I observe that the mayor in this instance does not have line item veto as he does with the budget, and that's going to be an important consideration watching this go forward. The reason for the urgency in November 2nd, in order to get the money from ARPA into the budget, the Common Council will have to say we're spending the money that way by November 2nd, so it'll be recognized for the budget, which, by the way, we will take up only 3 days later on November the 5th. So it's a very busy process. It can look awfully convoluted and complicated from the outside, but all of this, please, we urge you, it will all be live streamed and televised via our city channel. We encourage you to do that. I feel badly that Dennis one-upped me and included his phone number and contact information on his slide. I didn't do that. My desk is 286-2998, 286-2998. Please feel free to use it anytime if you have any questions about this or other governmental processes. I'm also on the city's, my email is on the city's website. And if you do the Twitter thing, my Twitter handle is MKEClerk, MKEClerk. And I'm always happy to take questions that way. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you so much, Dennis and Jim. And for anyone new joining us, again, I'm District 14 Alderwoman Marina Dimitrijevic. So just to kind of bring together the two areas we heard from were a snapshot in the process and the proposed 2022 budget from the mayor to the Common Council, which we are now having hearings on and will consider that alongside the ARPA, the American Rescue Plan that Jim just spoke about. So as you can see, very interesting times for the city of Milwaukee, which is why we wanted to have this public town hall meeting. And I just want to kind of finalize with the work that I've been doing and give you some thoughts of where I think the Common Council might be heading when it comes to the relief and federal money that Jim just outlined. So you have the process, the amount of money. Let's face it, local governments like ourselves and large cities throughout the United States, we're not necessarily set up to or expect this type of money. It's absolutely fantastic. It's exactly what we needed in these trying times of a very long pandemic. We have real lost revenue, real pain and suffering, and real cost to us. With that challenging time also comes great opportunity. And as Jim outlined, the relief money allows us to really, yes, come out of the pandemic, but come out, as I've said often, at least the values that are leading me through this effort to cast a vote on behalf of my district, is to come out stronger than we were pre-pandemic. I'm not interested in just finally moving forward after the pandemic and things go back to normal. Normal really wasn't working for a lot of people. So we need to invest this money in the transformational way, I believe, that does provide real relief, but also a real renaissance and revitalization that our city so desperately needs. And it's for that reason that after we've had a number of town hall meetings and the council has begun their discussions, and as you see, we begin to vote next week, we did a very large, long survey process. In fact, pretty excited. Thank you everyone from District 14. We were the #1 responders to the ARPA survey, giving our ideas and surveying in the order of importance, the things that we thought were important. So when you combine that along with community groups, additional emails and phone calls, and other items that are affecting our city, I do think that there are becoming very soon, it seems like, 3 what I would call consensus areas. Of course, we're still debating on how some of these work and the amount of money, but as you can see, affordable housing is one, lead abatement is another, and the pension. And if you were able to watch Dennis's presentation, the pension situation cannot be avoided. So these are the 3 areas where I, as a council member, am seeing consensus among my colleagues, and were rated through many forms of contact as areas of great concern and space for improvement. Next slide. So next slide, when we talk about affordable housing, just take a peek at this. This is a very powerful, powerful slide that shows a long, long history, a very challenging and somewhat depressing history of housing and housing needs. And the fact is that housing needs in the city of Milwaukee are just not being met. It is not something that can be solved only by the government, nor only by the private sector, but rather something we must join together as partners and solve. Because to me, it's absolutely unacceptable that a family or a couple or anyone trying to live and survive and hopefully thrive in the city can work pretty hard and still cannot afford safe, quality housing in the city of Milwaukee. It's just doesn't seem right. In fact, I really believe that it's down to a human right to be able to have a safe place to live, and it's something that we need to work towards helping make sure that everyone has stabilized. I mean, when we look at root causes of the eviction crisis, et cetera, it all intersects in a long history of really challenging situations, whether it be redlining, wages are too low, segregation, racism, you name it, it all intersects here, and we have to, and we will, and we must do better. So I wanted to paint a picture as to how many housing units we are still failing to meet. And you see here, you attach that to the demand and supply of affordable housing units. And remember, when we're talking about housing, not everyone is going to be ready to just walk into a home ownership situation. Some will be, and they just need a little bit of help to get there. But there are many people in our community that are looking for decent quality and affordable rental units too. So all of that is important. It's not just a one-piece solution, as you can see here. We want to make sure that all types of people, healthcare workers, hairdressers, restaurant workers, are able to live comfortably. Again, I just want to conclude this part that if you're able and you can work in any of these positions, I do think that what comes along with that is that you should be able to feel comfortable in a decent housing spot. So that is something that's completely under the purview of the city of Milwaukee, not alone, but we handle zoning, we handle economic development, and it's something that we can really make a difference in. And what time better than now when we have some new additional federal funding to really disrupt some of the market cycles that have hurt people and make a change and allow everyone to have the opportunity to thrive. which is why, we'll go to the next slide, which is why I believe there is quite a consensus both from the mayor's office as well as the Common Council to move forward on some expenditure package on housing. Well, deeply connected with our housing crisis is the fact that many of the homes that exist in the city of Milwaukee have had lead paint issues. It is a fact. It is something that we have not been able to really improve as much as we would have liked to. And we know for a fact, when you look at the housing units in the city of Milwaukee, they are quite old. And we know that lead is present. And unfortunately, many times we find this out through the testing of our children. And they do end up showing up through elevated blood levels. And personally, I believe that is a time when we are too late. We're arriving too late. We want to prevent it. And I just wanted to show you here in this slide the amount of children living in Milwaukee with elevated blood levels. I am of the mindset that there is really no safe lead level, in children. And I would like to see prevention as well as the abatement of lead paint in housing. Not only does it create a healthier city and safer city for everybody, but also it does increase the value of our housing stock. The most important thing to me is back to what I said about housing, that every Milwaukeean has the ability and opportunity to not just survive, but thrive. And when children have lead in their blood, we know that it produces a very terrible health outcome. It puts them on a different trajectory, and that it can affect your learning. It sometimes results in learning disabilities, and those issues play out in the city of Milwaukee public schools. It is preventable. We should be abating as soon as possible. And I think you're going to see a substantial expenditure in our ARPA money to work with public and private partnerships and some nonprofits to expedite the abatement. It's a very unique process. It's something that takes a lot of work and specialized construction, but it must be done, and we can no longer wait. So I think this is an area of great concern. It's a great investment to try to turn these things around, and our children are counting on us to make a change here. Next slide. Just to conclude this point, just like I talked about with housing, we know that the elevated blood levels affect certain districts, certain parts of the city, and quite frankly, our Black and brown children have shown to have a higher instance of a possibility of an elevated blood level, and that's just not acceptable. And so that's why we want to restore some equity, some justice, and we think by an infusion of money to abate this problem and promote the health of all of our children in the city, it's a very worthy investment of this money. And lastly, just like Dennis painted that picture, which is not really a positive picture, but we have the reality of it. We owe people their pensions. It's our obligation. We need to pay our money, and we want to have a decent credit rating, just like you in your own household. If you make a commitment, you do need to uphold it. And as you can see, with each year coming up, it's just going to balloon, and that balloon eventually is going to explode. So we, like many cities, have a couple options. Again, it's kind of repetitive to what Dennis mentioned, but with the state not allowing us to increase our own revenues or find additional options to increase revenues, we only have a few places to go. And so we're constantly trying to be creative and find different ways. But I can tell you that the community, the government, and people know that if we don't get some control on this rising cost, city services could be compromised, and that is not something that I want to see happen. So we must find a way to continue to pay that obligation down, and we need to continue to work with state government to allow us additional local control. The party that currently dominates in the state of Wisconsin, the legislature, once was known to be a party that really believed in local control, and they should allow us to talk to our residents. We know best. We're here in Milwaukee, and we can ask for additional ways to create revenue and work on our challenges. And I think that that's the best thing, is they could just let us be, and we were elected by the people in Milwaukee, and we can face our challenges together. We can do that through meetings like this or a referendum, but we have spoken out that there are many options to seek to try to increase our revenue. They put caps on us. we don't get our fair share of shared revenue, and then they limit us for what we can do, that is a recipe for disaster. And we're not there yet, but if we don't get some control over this, it could be disastrous. And I don't want to see that happen, because there's too many great city services that have been built up over decades that my children, your children, everybody deserves to enjoy. That infrastructure is incredibly valuable, and we must protect it for generations to come. Next slide. So that's where I thought the consensus of the Common Council members is heading on some very large items. Here's a few things that I'm personally working on. And one of them is on childcare, early childhood education support. And the other is on climate and workforce development. These are not the only things that I care about, but in a large sea of over 72 requests for ARPA money, we've all seemed to find something that we are passionate about, our district has spoken to us about, and we think we can make a change. Next slide. I have been working with a really fantastic group of early childhood and education providers that have been organized and have some cutting edge data that shows that we have a child care desert. We talk about infrastructure a lot when we talk about, nationally, the infrastructure bill, but even locally with our ARPA funding. But what about the human infrastructure? Many of us were, when schools were closed and COVID hit, were left for months. I myself, 6 months. I do remember exactly how long it was, with absolutely no childcare. Well, you add that pandemic to what already is an existing childcare desert in Milwaukee, meaning that there's just not enough slots to fill the need. And there is a solution. We think we can disrupt that cycle a bit. You can see here that there's a shortage. Let's go back one more. Sorry. There we go. A shortage of slots needed to meet families' needs. And that means in a desert, if you can be somewhat close to the childcare and be able to work. And it really is an equity issue. 98% or so of childcare workers are women, and the majority are of color. Also, we know that in the pandemic, women in particular were hit very hard. And due to the lack of childcare and perhaps coming out of the pandemic, may not even return to the workforce. This is an economic problem, a racial challenge, and a gender equity issue. So the solution, next slide, is to disrupt the cycle. And we have a couple points here that we think can help. The first and foremost is raising the wages of childcare workers through stipends directly to the workers in the centers. These stipends have been researched to show that they really increase retention and not have a labor shortage, because that way we can get at providing more slots and reducing those waiting lists. We also have to recruit and train more people into the sector and make a serious investment. It's a job creator. It's a good job, especially since we're raising wages slightly. And we want to try to attract and train more men of color specifically into this profession. And we have a way to do it with MATC and Milwaukee Rising, as well as leading men fellows. And lastly, $2.5 million would be invested in affordable housing, specifically approximately 60 units for early childhood educators. I'd like to think that we'd all be willing to live next to any workforce housing, but wouldn't it be special to have this incubator that's affordable? Many early childhood providers and even teachers at MPS schools can't afford to live in the neighborhood where they work. And that's a problem, and we need to solve it. So I'm pretty excited about this initiative, and we'll see if it gets the approval from my colleagues. And then the last item, I don't really have a slide on it because I'm still working on it, but it is an environmental climate justice piece. And let me see what time we have. Oh, we're almost at our time, so I'll make it really quick. I do think as we're going to expend nearly $400 million in federal relief funds, we must look at it with a climate and climate equity lens. This is the time to make sure that this investment is being done in an environmentally safe way. We can make some progress on our city-county task force of climate equity and justice, and those things really matter. And one particular area that I'm concerned about that I think could have a great benefit for future generations is expanding our urban canopy. And by having more trees and increasing our canopy coverage, it could actually reduce energy costs And we have data that we've been shown that in certain parts of the city where there isn't sufficient cover, which is generally about 40%, energy costs are much higher, meaning that people living in a certain zip code and generally our communities of color are paying more for energy. And that just doesn't seem right. It's not fair. And we know that having an urban canopy and trees not only is aesthetically pleasing, but provides many, many benefits, including the ones I just outlined. So I'm examining that. I'm not sure that it'll be in the first grouping, but it's something that I want to make sure I push to talk about and consider. In conclusion, you heard from the budget office, the city clerk talking about the process for our federal relief funds, ARPA, me with some ideas of where I think consensus is and some particular things I'm working on. I want to thank you for listening. And now, if you could type in the question box any questions you have. We have about 15 or 20 minutes to answer them. I'll allow you some time to find that box. As of right now, I don't see anybody, but feel free to ask anything about the budget or ARPA. And I'll give everybody a few more minutes to consider typing any questions. And if not, then we'll probably wrap it up, but I just want to double check. Okay. Again, you're going to be posting that in the question box. If you have any questions. Oh, I think I see something in the chat box. Hold on. Oh, okay. Oh, great. Oh, here they come. You mentioned the rise. Hold on a second. They came flooding in. Hold on, bear with me here. Okay, so we'll go in order that I received them. You mentioned the rise in pension cost. Hang on, let me just read here. What % of the pension increase is for the police? Dennis? I want to see how much Dennis has memorized here. Dennis?
I have very little outside of the city budget in my head, so I can answer this one. 80% is police and fire. I am not exactly sure, but the police make the majority of that breakdown. But from a sworn personnel standpoint, it's 80% for police and fire.
Thank you. That answers that question. The second one might be for you as well. Has the city had an increase in taxable property?
That is a good question that I am not quite sure. I do know that the property values have gone up. I would assume part of it is due to new construction that could have been put in vacant properties. So likely there is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's something we can find out from the assessor's office too. I know the people in my district have felt the annual major increase in value and assessment increases, and it's gotten to be a lot. And I think that's probably part of where that question may be coming from. Okay, next, hold on here. What was the estimated loss of revenue due to the pandemic, and where was most of the loss from?
You're really testing my memory, but
just generally.
Yeah, I do know that it's 53.6 million of revenue loss per the federal government formula that they gave us to follow. A lot of that came in the form of parking revenue. Parking meters and structure revenue were down considerably. Actually, the way the formula worked, we got some help in shared revenue because that doesn't increase, and the formula assumed a 4% growth in revenue. So we actually did get some for that as well. So those were probably the two biggest areas.
Okay. Why did the pension budget increase 2 times between 2022 and 2023? Oh, well, I can answer that. That's just, those are the projections, right, Dennis? Those are the projections, our anticipated pension costs. So they're projected changes.
Yes.
Is there any discussion with the Common Council regarding funding law enforcement, given the steady rise in violent crimes. Well, the mayor has made a proposal. I believe, was that for the 3 additional classes, Dennis?
Yes, the mayor proposed to add 195 positions, have them filled. The overall strength of the police department will fall slightly by 25 in the proposed budget.
Right, and part of that too is due to attrition, right? People leaving the police force and us maybe
Yeah,
not.
most of it's attrition. A lot of it is through retirement.
Yeah, I just wanted people to understand that. So we're looking at a multi-level solution. I think we need to also look at some root causes, the Office of Violence Prevention. There's many ways we can get at this, but I do agree with your assessment there that the violent crimes are absolutely unacceptable. Someone had a difficult time finding the chat box. Yes, this is the question box. We're gonna go till 7 with questions in the question box. So let me just delete these so I can see the other ones. Okay. I think your idea is great about affordable housing for people that work in a neighborhood school. But how do you think you can do all this and we still have potholes in our neighborhood that have been present for over a year? I think we need to invest in fixing our existing infrastructure before spending on new initiatives. Okay, very good point. Very good point. I do believe there's also some talk about streetlight repairs. And, I think that we will be continuing to look at the infrastructure. I focused on 3 consensus areas, but there is a lot more out there. There's 72 amendments for ARPA. And I know that there is also some consensus around streetlight repairs and circuit. And then Dennis, did you have something to offer?
Yes, what I wanted to let everybody know is that the American Recovery Act cannot be used for infrastructure directly. The revenue loss that was spoke of, the limited amount of it that we could use is where we could use it for infrastructure. What we're also hoping for is that the federal government passes the infrastructure bill. That's where we would expect to see some funds that will likely help us with the street conditions.
Yeah, I hope everybody heard that. That's also where we hope to get some support for our lead laterals and infrastructure, is that federal infrastructure bill. So, okay. Is there a hotline for potholes? Yeah, isn't that the 286 city, as well as using the city app? I actually like the app very much because you can just tap it in and give an address and they will get to it. Obviously nothing is immediate, but using the 286 city or the app, we have a city app, you can look it up, MKE app. You can also go online and report it. Those are the quickest ways to get service. And if you just see them and report them, we have people do that all the time, they do get to it. Takes a little while, but we're working on it. And I've seen success there. Is there any plan on asking police to pay into their own pension plans like is required of our city's teachers? Dennis, do you know anything about that? I think that's a negotiation.
Yeah, it is negotiated. We are looking at some options to move new employees perhaps to a different system. Would be the same place the teachers are, but that has to be negotiated.
Right. So what Dennis is saying is we are looking at all options. All options are on the table to change the trajectory of our pension system. And the reason it has to focus on new employees is if somebody already has a pension agreement, right? It's basically a property right. So it's hard to go backwards, but you can make changes going forward. The police department is approximately 800 to 900 officers short from 10 years ago. The 180 officers barely offset retirements. Is there, oh, sorry, let me read this. Is there, hang on here. Is there a plan that continued those class sizes for future years? We can only budget for 1 year, which is 2022. We can't do a budget that goes into 2023 or 2024. So the budget that's in front of us, as Dennis stated, does have additional classes for police officers from the mayor. And you know, it's kind of interesting because this conversation is a bit cyclic because we're also talking about the pension. So there would be an increased pension cost to have those new officers. But the reason we're down some officers is due to attrition and retirement. But I think your point is made is that we haven't kept up with replacing those that have left. But
the other
right.
piece is the Fire and Police Commission can only hire so many per year, so we're kind of limited with that. The other piece I'd like to point out is I know when you're referring to some of the higher numbers of officers back in the 90s, there was a lot of COP grant money that the city received, so we did not have to pay for that out of the city funds. And what happened, those grants went away over time, so we were unable to keep up and fund those.
Thank you. This is the last call then for any more questions in the question box about the ARPA federal relief money, the process, or the budget. Just a reminder before we close down for the night, I am very easy to reach, as you can see on the screen. I don't force anyone to spell my last name in my email, but it's marina@milwaukee.gov. Actually, between Dennis, myself, and Jim, we all got some good names there that are challenging. But again, marina@milwaukee.gov. You can call us at 286-3769. It's just myself and my assistant, Terry. Many ways to reach out to us. This is probably our 5th or 6th town hall meeting, virtually and in person. We love to have input. Someone said good meeting, good questions and answers. So hey, never know what you're going to see in that chat box. Anyway, continue to follow the process. While some of the things we've talked about, I never like to end anything on a negative note. Anyone who knows me, some of the things we talked about are challenges. Many urban cities, just like us, just our size, are faced with very similar situations, very similar amount of ARPA and federal money to invest. And I think that the exciting thing is that while the challenges feel daunting at times, there's also a great amount of opportunity. I believe that when this ARPA funding to the tune of roughly $400 million has been expended, our city will look and feel quite different. It may not change the entire city, but it will change the lives of some people in the city. And I think that's pretty exciting. So let's stand by. Thank you for your input and joining us. And you can contact us at any time. Thank you to Dennis. Thank you to Jim. And you don't see her, but she's behind the scenes. The lovely Terry, my legislative assistant. Thank you to her too. And everybody have a wonderful evening. Thank you.